much, Professor José Márcio. It's a pleasure to be here on behalf of the Swedish Consulate General and of the Eurocâmaras, the arbitration chamber of São Paulo. I have to thank especially our good friend Jacqueline Gill for the invitation. For all her contact was enabled for me to get to know Professor Zygrid Guillamon as well. And also I'm seeing other people, Rogério Santos. So, well, first of all, I thought I could share with you some ideas about what I do myself, a bit of my professional career. How did I get to where I am right now? I think this normally is of interest for students to understand how things were after, university comes to an end, right? We realize when we are students, we are aiming at finishing something, but real life starts thereafter. And every day we have new challenges. And I never thought about becoming a Consul General of Sweden. That was for me a big surprise. I did not study for diplomacy. I went for law school. I have a legal background. And what happened to me in my career was that I always thought we should try to plan ahead and get a straight plan. But I have to be honest, that did never work out. I mean, I realized very soon that life was like more curves, road, and not really a straight, point where you come from, where you want to go to. And then, of course, I had myself the opportunity to leave in the law school to go for studying abroad. I chose that time Germany because I'm old-fashioned person. I graduated in the beginning of the 90s, right after Germany was reunificated. And then I thought it could be interesting for me to go to West and East Germany together to understand the legal phenomenon, how two countries came together like a merger and started driving its economy to, well, boost European economy. At that time, the EU was already very developed. We got the Maastricht Agreement in 1993, but we were far from where we are today. And then, of course, you can ask, but what does it have to do with Sweden? I mean, you see on the background, I have the Swedish flag. And of course, in spite of the fact that Sweden has also half German queen, who was born there, Queen Sylvia, she's half Brazilian but half German. I mean, I only after my studies in Germany decided to go to Sweden for executive education. So that's why personally, Professor Márcio, I realize it's very important for students, regardless of where they come from, regardless of the area they're trying to study or deepen their knowledge, to be open-minded and try to get a broad view of everything which pops up in their lives and take the challenges, right? So when I came back to Brazil after studying Germany, and also I took some education in France, I started to run my law firm, working for, of course, private sector, mainly foreign investors who had businesses in Brazil. And then I associated our office to the Swedish Chamber of Commerce, which happened to be quite close to my location here in Jardins in São Paulo. And I said, well, the German chamber is too far. It was on the other side of the city. And I said, well, so I changed like 2 blocks right at the corner here, better go there. And then I was very much inspired by the motto I saw from the Nordic countries, because Germany, of course, is a very big economy. We are used to say it's the motor of the EU, right? Whereas Sweden and Denmark and Finland, they're very small economies in the EU. And also, if you put all together, the 4 Nordic countries, it's interesting to mention that they have almost the same Brazil's GDP, right? Which is interesting to remark, because if you see, we have over 210 million people, and the other countries I just mentioned have no more than 21 million people, but they produce the same volume of products, services, and wealth. And this is something which, of course, attract my attention. That said, I started because I was already married, father. I had, of course, my law firm. I could not go abroad to spend a year or 2 years like I did before for my master's program. So I took, as very commonly nowadays, this kind of executive education, where you take some modules. And I went in place because at that time, we did not have the Zoom facility. We did not have any kind of electronic platforms, digital transmission. So I had to take almost every 2 months the plane. I went 6 times a year to Sweden to, well, take my classes. And I was lucky that the flight took me over 15 hours. So I had enough time to prepare for the classes. And that was, of course, a challenging time, but I was much younger. I had a lot of energy. And that helped me, of course, not only to learn, well, the stuff in the business school, but also the Swedish culture, its language. And then after I came back, I was already the legal director of SUECHEM in Brazil. And SUECHEM is part of what we call the Team Sweden. Team Sweden is what we say the private and the governmental sector of Sweden together. Of course, for the private sector, we have the Chamber of Commerce. SUECHEM was founded in 1942 and has now over 70 years of experiences with both Swedish companies coming to Brazil, but the other way around also, Brazilian companies exporting to Sweden. There are not many Brazilian companies investing in Sweden, but there are many exporting products and also services. I'm going to get back to this later on. And I just mentioned this because I think it's important for your students to understand that nothing of that was planned. As I mentioned before, I always took a very much entrepreneurial approach to let me try the opportunities that the destiny offered me. And of course, I could say, well, I stay in my comfort zone. I don't move. There are good schools. By the way, my wife is also a professor at Fundação Getúlio Vargas in São Paulo. I could have taken a nice program there, but I said it's important in life to dare and to challenge yourself, right? And so every minute I invested abroad in my education, every minute and also every cent I invested was much worth. It came back at least 10 times to me. And not only to me, but also for my colleagues, for my teams, and also for everything I try to represent today. But of course, I don't want to take your time to only talk about me. That's not what I'm here for, right? I'm here more to share with you, the experience that Sweden has had in Brazil over the years, and also talk a bit about the outlook from Sweden to the EU perspective. Of course, mainly out of the recent bilateral negotiations between the Mercosur, not only Brazil, and the European Union, right? But maybe just to say a bit more about Sweden, and I share with you, well, coming out to my consulship experience, how was it for me as I started almost 10 years ago? And I was surprised because, as I mentioned, I did not prepare for diplomacy. I have a legal background. I did never go to the Rio Branco Institute in Brazil, so I'm not a career diplomat. But I realized that when I received the invitation from the Swedish government, they said, well, you have a legal background, but you also have a business background because you've been running the Chamber of Commerce for many years as a legal director. And I was also already participating in the Eurocâmaras. Eurocâmaras, of course, is the umbrella organization for all the bilateral European Chambers of Commerce in Brazil. And then, of course, I realized I could be of help for the so-called Team Sweden, right? The governmental part, but also the private part, completing each other in a good synergy. And therefore, in 2012, almost 10 years ago, I took over the Swedish Consul General position in São Paulo. And that has been very nice to see, well, how things work from the other side. I was always representing many companies investing in Brazil, but also, of course, Sweden has a very liberal economy, right? I mean, it has a very nice tradition of being a very social state, very protective. People have a lot of rights, but people forget that Sweden has also a very much liberal economy, and it's one of the, if not the most developed country in terms that per capita, there are many Swedish companies which are big companies investing abroad. Of course, the United States or even other European states have maybe more companies, but of course, in proportion to their population, Sweden has per capita many more. And nowadays, of course, we are on Zoom, but before Zoom, who does not remember the Skype tool? Skype was a Swedish invention. I mean, if you take a bus in Brazil, either a Scania bus or a Volvo bus, it's Swedish, right? Even if you want, well, to put your food in the refrigerator, it's probably Electrolux. So it's very hard to get out of a Swedish product, but Sweden uh, has trademarks which are more known for the B2B. The B2C would say maybe Spotify, or would say Astrid Lindgren, but they would probably remember Sweden for two things normally. First, that Brazil won its first World Cup in Sweden. That's something people like to say, right? And that's why we have also not only have a Brazilian Queen Silva, have German, as I said before, but also have Brazilian. Her mother was Brazilian, but also King Pelé, because Pelé became world champion Stockholm first time. So these are cultural facts that approach, of course, very different countries. Sweden is a very liberal, very open, market-oriented economy, whereas Brazil, I think we are going to all agree on this, is a very closed still economy nowadays. And that's why it's such a huge challenge to take the benefit of the Mercosur EU free trade agreement, right? But just to finish this Swedish part, I realized when I entered this consulship position that, of course, a council has to do with different activities, starting from visiting prisoners who are traffic dealers. Thanks God, Sweden does not have a lot of these cases. We have some. We are not a perfect country. There is no perfect country on earth. But of course, we also have nice things when, for instance, Carl Gustaf, the King of Sweden, comes to Brazil to inaugurate in Fiesp premises the Nobel Prize exhibition 2013. That's, of course, a very nice event with a lot of authorities, governmental representatives of the state of São Paulo, City Hall, and so on. So, I mean, the consulship position is very diverse, right? There are days you are speaking to students at Universidade de Brasília. Other day, I mean, I'm talking to Business Sweden to help them get, I mean, certain knowledge about the Brazilian market, but also sharing, I mean, my experience, the Chamber of Commerce. And we also have, as I think always worth mentioning, what we call the CISB. Jacqueline probably knows about it because she was running REACH here for many months. CISB, the Centro de Inovação Sueco-Brasileiro, right? And this has a lot to do with the model that Sweden promotes in Brazil. Sweden is not only looking to sell products or export its goods. No, that's not the philosophy Sweden has. Sweden has a much more interesting approach. It wants to create partnerships and really share technology. And in this regard, I could, of course, mention a lot of examples, but I think the most well-known one is, of course, the Gripen, the Brazilian air fighter, which is, of course, a joint production of Brazil, but also Swedish companies. You could say, besides Embraer in the consortium, there are many other Brazilian players, but also you have Saab in Linköping, Sweden, who received 200 engineers from Brazil to be co-creating the aircraft to be produced in Brazil. And then, of course, Saab also invested in place in São Bernardo do Campo in a factory to assemble the air fighters in the long run. That's, I think, something I want to highlight because there is a difference, and I think your students are, of course, aware of that, that when you are trading, is a short-run activity, right? You sell the goods. I mean, somebody takes care of transporting them. Well, the logistics there, you get paid, and that's it. Of course, much more than just selling products. An investment is a long shot, is a long run approach, right? Because nobody invests for a year. That's not realistic. Everybody would take the investment approach to think of a horizon of at least 20 years, if not more. That's at least how Swedish philosophy works. Swedish companies, they try to invest, thinking not to make money within 5 years, but within 5 years to understand what the market is, to be able to really liaise with the counterparts in place to assemble the different cultures, and not say that Swedish culture is better, but say that, well, Brazil and Swedish culture have to work together, taking its advantages, but also disadvantages, right? And after this, I mean, we also received here in Brazil many Swedish families after the Brazilians returned from Linköping, because all the Swedish engineers want to be in place in Brazil to get to know the Brazilian culture and build a Brazilian air fighter. And that's, of course, a great event, right? Because it does not only create a lot of jobs, it pays taxes for Brazilian government, and it allows students from Brazil to get a chance to really work in a multicultural project. And I say multicultural because Sweden is not only a country of one culture. I mean, those who know better the country knows that Finns migrated in a huge diaspora to Sweden, and that's not without any cause. That in Finland people also speak Swedish as another language, right? Sweden's territory was much larger than it is today nowadays, so Sweden has had along the different centuries this experience of going always abroad, thinking of a liberal economy, open-minded, and of course free trade approach. And that's why when I received this invitation from Jacqueline, I thought it could be interesting to share the Swedish perspective, but also to liaise it to the European perspective, right? Because nowadays, people may ask, but what is really Sweden? I mean, it's such a small country. People would think of rock sets, of Dancing the Queen, but not many people know what really Sweden is. And I share with you a very funny story. Now it became a joke, but it was very serious for me in the first year I took the consulate over. I was at home Sunday morning, reading my papers, doing my pajamas, and well, somebody called me, and was my assistant telling that the police officer wanted me to go to a hotel in São Paulo to check a body of a Swede who fell from the 10th floor. He committed suicide. And I said, well, my God, so I had to go there. It's not a nice thing, but I was warned that things like that could happen. And then, of course, I went quickly to take a shower, raise myself. I was almost wearing my clothes to go out when the phone rang again and said, sorry, não era sueco, era suíço. So I tell this joke because many people still confuse Sweden and Switzerland, because we say Suécia and Swiss in Brazil, right? And they're totally different countries. Of course, Sweden does not have a lot of mountains like Switzerland has. The climate is still maybe quite close, but I mean, Sweden has a long tradition from the Vikings as well. And Sweden, as mentioned before, conquered a lot of territories. I mean, it came to the north of Germany. It was part of what today is Finland, Norway, even Denmark. So Sweden has a very strong Nordic approach. But I mean, today, Sweden has, of course, a very strong cooperation with its neighbors, right? I mean, I mentioned the Nordic countries before, and to give you an example of what happens in the city of São Paulo, we have, of course, in the Scandinavian Church, we have a Scandinavian Association, where all the cultures try, well, to work with each other, and that's great. We celebrate Easter, we celebrate Christmas, many other events. Of course, nowadays, not presentially anymore, but virtually, but that works. I mean, I think in a nutshell, that's of course an overview about Sweden. I want now to get a bit deeper into its economic model, how Sweden has its society organized. I think this is something important for you to understand, of course, and how does this influence? Why? Because some of you might remember that when in June 2019, the EU member states and also, well, EU delegation and EU Commission agreed to sign the EU-Mercosur agreement. The trade commissioner was Swedish, was Cecilia Malmström. And Cecilia Malmström was, of course, a member of Swedish Parliament, a member of the European Parliament, trade commissioner. And of course, her way of thinking, of course, influenced a lot, I mean, the European approach in all its bilateral and multilateral trade agreements. And Swedish society is very stable. I mean, we don't have a hierarchy. So you never say in Sweden, o senhor. You always say, você. I remember when I met the prime minister, he said, call me Stefan. My name is Stefan. I happen to be now the prime minister, but I'm not an authority. I'm serving my country. And that's, I think, something important for us Brazilians to understand, that normally Brazilian representatives, they think they are authorities, many times serving themselves, but not serving the people, not serving the country. And Sweden, up to 1986, as well, is worth and interesting to remember that the prime minister had no residence. He used to live in his own place until the day he was shot. There was Olof Palme. He was assassinated, murdered on the street. And then, of course, for security measures, the government took another approach and said, we have now to offer the prime minister a residency. That was, of course, never the case before, because public money is taxpayers' money in Sweden, and that's very much valued. So that's to say that in the Swedish companies, the structure is very flat, very horizontal. The hierarchy doesn't play a big role. So nobody will call you Mr. or Senor. Everybody's called by the first name. The only family which is not called by the first name is, of course, the royal family, right? But even the royal family is itself not Swedish from origin. It is French, because the Bernadottes, as Napoleon sent Bernadotte to Sweden, he decided to stay there in spite of the cold weather. And well, then the dynasty is still there after 200 years. And it's interesting to see that in Swedish monarchy nowadays, all the kids, they did not marry nobles. They married people from the society, right? And that shows a lot of the value Sweden has, that nobody's better than the other. Everybody's very equal. And that's why social and welfare state has a lot of value in Sweden, because people think that what is common is more important than what is single, what is private. And I say this because you're going to see in the whole European discussion for the bilateral Mercosur free trade agreement, the question, but what does Brazil win out of this? Is it important for us? We already trade, we already have investment for centuries. The Portuguese came here 521 years ago. Why do we need an agreement? I mean, we never had an agreement and things work, right? But the truth of the matter is that nowadays we estimate that every 5 billion euros which are paid on tariffs, they could generate at least 15,000 jobs, either in Brazil or the EU, right? So if you make a calculation, in 10 years, you are saving 50 billion. Is a lot, right? You are creating 150,000 jobs. And that's, of course, we are talking about 500,000 people being granted the access to, well, economy. And that's in a country like Brazil, I think extremely important if you look at the employment rates we have nowadays. So I think this whole European, and now I move to the European scenario a little bit, but I promise I will also give the students the floor later on to ask questions. I'm not just here to teach. I never taught myself, but I'm here more to share my views. But I think moving to the European scenario, I think it's important to see that nothing is just a fruit of coincidence. Nothing happened by chance. If you see, actually, all the bilateral free trade agreements, they are not aiming only trade. They're aiming something much higher. They're aiming stability, cooperation. And I mean, it's interesting to see that in 2012, now relating again Sweden and EU, European Commission received the Nobel Prize for Peace. What does the European Union have to do with this Nobel Prize in Peace? And the fact that people don't see is that all this trade agreements, all these investment agreements, they started after Second World War to try to generate more stability among the countries, among different communities. And that, of course, started with the coal, with steel, that started with the Economic Committee. We never spoke about, until 1957, we never spoke about a committee of the European countries, because they were only 6 in the beginning, right? Nowadays, they are 27. So I always make the comparison between the Brazilian model. We have 26 member states, Estados Federados, and the federal district. So we are also 27. And after the UK left the EU, they are also 27. So we have equal structures, but very differently. And I mean, since Adenauer in Germany, all those big politicians who work a lot and contributed to the European idea, had in mind not only to raise profits, but also to bring peace to the European countries. And this is important because if you see 1957, the world was very different, right? The EU did not exist yet, but Europe was much behind the United States. Bretton Woods had already came to reality. I mean, New Hampshire, almost 10 years ago, started to debate how to have a general agreement on trade and tariffs, which went up to the 80s, right, with the Uruguay round. And then you start realizing that Americans were trying also, well, to create an interconnected economy where these chains were depending on each other, right? So you could not have one country having the monopoly over the whole production, but you have this, well, supply here, you have consumptions there, and you have delivery somewhere else, and the workforce being hired in another jurisdiction. So nowadays it's very common that when you get a product, I mentioned Saab, for instance. Saab is not only Swedish, Saab has American components, German components, French components, and at least 12 other states components. And that is to say that this interconnection in the production chains became a reality because of all these bilateral or multilateral agreements, right? So nowadays we see that but why after 2 years we did not ratify the Mercosur-EU free trade agreement? And I say always, well, it is still too early. I say, but why is too early? It's already 2 years. I say 2 years is nothing if you compare to the 20 years we took to come to 2019, right? We started in 1999 and we negotiated 20 years to get there. And now 2 years is less than 10%. But people say, but the government now has been censored. I mean, it's not getting approval, climate problems, deforestation, Amazon. And I say, look, a treaty is not among governments. That's wrong. A government, of course, executes a treaty, but a treaty is about states, is about cooperation in the long term. And of course, if you say, well, a government's term is 4 years, that's nothing. Within the negotiation period, we had 5 different governments, and we might have 50 others in the future. So that's why, again, when we think about this EU-Mercosur free trade agreement, we have to think in the long run, like Swedes do, right? They don't invest for getting profits within 2-3 years. They invest for getting profits after 5 years, but again, to sharing its values. And I mean, some things I believe are very important to mention to the students here. Why should we have this agreement if the EU has so far been investing in Brazil for such much time and things always work? Because the world nowadays is very different than it was before, right? China was not that strong it was before. United States now is recovering its political stability, but of course, in a totally different world where Asia became stronger. It's not by chance that also EU has agreements with Japan, it has agreements with Canada. So we have today a multipolar system where there are different leadership scenarios, not only one Cold War with 2 big players. That's a past story. And therefore, the EU plays a very important role in this balance between China on the one side in Asia and still the United States of America in the Western world, right? So the EU is somewhere in the middle, and the EU has a very strong responsibility of caring for its values. I mean, nobody doubts that China figures are growing every day. It's enough to open the papers and read the GDPs growth they had last year in spite of pandemic, which is amazing, right? But I mean, how about human rights? How about separation of powers, freedom of speech? These are values which start in Europe, right? They did not start in the US, they did not start in China, they start in Europe. And today, think about the fact that the EU is the smallest continent, and I dare to say continent, even though there are many countries in Europe which are not still part of the EU, right? But we're talking about let's round the figures, about 500 million people, which is less than 10% of the world's population. But if you get the Mercosur market, we're talking about at least half of the European Union's population, 250 million people, including, of course, Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, and Brazil. You can raise 50% your domestic market. And that's, of course, very important for the EU, but it's also very important for Brazil, because there's no doubt, there is no mystery and no secret about saying that Brazilian state doesn't have enough funds to, help research and education in the country. Our budget has just been approved, and we all know the huge challenges that we have. And without the foreign investment in Brazil, mainly from the EU, which is still the largest investor, we have over 300 billion euros invested in Brazil. Very probably many things would not happen today here, right? So this is, as I said before, we get also as Brazilians a very broader window to competition, cheaper products, quality control, and many other measures. We all know that nowadays, already between Brazil and Argentina, is very hard to export, right? So this standardization for custom clearance proceedings, for instance, will not happen the day after. It will take a lot of time, but it will happen that also the intra-regional trade among the Mercosur states will benefit from. And of course, think about, quality control, sanitary measures, phytosanitary standards. They're very important to assure good quality for the products. So this all will happen only after, the agreement comes in force. And allow me to give a very short window how the agreement looks today. We are still in the scrambling phase of the legal text. Of course, in 2019, there was a political will to go together, but of course, the text has to be legally discussed, get to a consensus, and then later translate into 23 languages. And that takes a lot of time, right? I have a legal background and I know that the devil resides in the details. So the legal experts in the EU Commission are scrabbling every day the different chapters, the different articles, and trying to get consensus on the final language. Once it's done, it has to be translated to 23 other languages. Thereafter, the Commission will submit this agreement also to two other important bodies from the EU, the European Council and the European Parliament. And only after this, the member states in both sides, on the EU side, on Mercosur side, have to ratify. So it's not only the 27 member states ratifying, but also the 4 Mercosur states ratifying. So I think in a very optimistic perspective, if we are lucky, it could take still 2-3 years, maybe more, we don't know. But the good thing in the story is that when this is done, we have a huge horizon of cooperation. This EU Mercosur Free Trade Agreement represents 25% of the world's trade nowadays. And also it will allow a lot of investments in the long run. Because as I said, people nowadays are afraid of investing in Brazil. They say, well, it's not very stable. There's a lot of red tape. Public tenders are limited to Brazilian companies. If you go as a foreign company to a bid in Brazil, it's very complicated. But they want to have equal chances for competing. And this is good for the market because it allows us to have cheaper prices, right, as consumers in the end. So there are many, many advantages. And I believe that, of course, all this can be shared and has to be also discussed within academia, within the government, within the private sector. And I will finish in 2-3 minutes this first sharing of experiences. But I think an idea which is very key for us all is to understand that nowadays, no economy on earth is self-standing alone, right? You have to think of the Swedish model again. In Sweden, I mentioned Electrolux. Electrolux sells refrigerators in Sweden. We have possibly 3 million households in Sweden for 10 million people. Imagine how many more they sell in Brazil. I mean, Sweden, you can cross the whole country within 2 hours flight. Brazil, you need at least 5, if not more hours from the south to the Amazon region, right? So very probably Saab are going to produce many more air fighters in Brazil than in Sweden because it's not necessary there. And this applies almost to every product which is produced not only in Sweden, but in Europe as a whole, right? So it's important to take into perspective, and I will conclude that EU, Mercosur, if you get the consumers market together, will amount to 10% of the world's population. Again, 500 million from the EU, consumers, citizens, and 250 from Mercosur. This is still 750 million, is 10% of the population of the world, right? And for the EU, it's important somehow to keep its leadership, not only in terms of products, not only in terms of services, of investment, but of values. In a world where digitalization every day goes further and further, there are no borders. The only real border is here inside our brain and communication. And because English is so nowadays world and widespread, people can interact with each other, and that's a great tool. So I think I had planned more or less just 40 minutes to start, but I will be open, of course, for questions. My idea was not to exhaust the whole Sweden or EU perspective, but just to, inspire the discussion. I thank you for the opportunity, and I'm very glad to, debate and answer the questions which might come. Thank you so much.
Mr. Renato Pacheco, thank you very much for a brilliant presentation. We had a long tradition of business with Sweden. Many Swedish multinationals are in Brazil and did a lot in terms of development and trade with us. And we're still receiving Swedish investment nowadays. It's good to see that we can have a bright future ahead. Just to tell you, my former boss, the head of our department, Dr. Catarina Delius, is from, I think, a Swedish mother. And she's from São Paulo, and a huge influence in our department. So the Swedish influence is closer than you think.
Happy to know. It's a very common Swedish name, and I did not mention before, but of course, besides the Nobel Prize, we have a lot of very worldwide well-known scientists. Think about the Celsius grades, right? We say today is 25 Celsius. Celsius is also Swedish scientist, right? Just by coincidence, by chance.
Yes. So my first question, you think, which are the main Swedish investment in Brazil right now? What do you think will be the main horizon for economic interaction in the coming years?
Well, very good question, Professor Marcio, and the answer straight away is communication, right? Telecom. We are right now approaching the tender for the 5G, and Sweden has a company called Ericsson. And by the way, Ericsson, I have to mention, is the oldest company investing in Brazil. Emperor Peter II visited Sweden in the 19th century and brought Ericsson to invest in Brazil. So the very first call made in Brazil was using an Ericsson device. And that's very symbolic because, of course, now we are over 180 years thereafter. But of course, Ericsson has been investing in Brazil, and we believe that communications, as I mentioned before, is a key tool for succeeding this interconnection of production chains, right? Because nowadays, how can people get together? We have to share social isolation or social distancing. And if we do not rely on a very good communication system, that's not possible. I remember my first mobile phone I purchased 20 years ago. And nowadays I see, well, the ones who are cleaning the streets, the garbage, they have mobile phones. But mobile phones were very expensive. But because of globalization, because of the access to the market, it became cheaper. And the same applies for the 5G. So back to your question, Professor Marcio, communication is number one for us. The same way defense is a key area for Sweden. As I mentioned before, also Saab started to negotiate with Brazil at least 14, 15 years before it was granted the tender in 2013. Saab invested as from 1999 in the defense sector in Brazil, trying to offer a co-creation model. So Saab never thought of just selling a product and keeping the secret formula. No, it said we have to go together and build with Brazilian friends, scientists, researchers, a co-creation. And so defense is, of course, a very, very important area for Sweden. And last but not least, of course, everything which is related to energy. I mean, sustainable development in Sweden. We are one of the greenest countries in Earth. It's not by chance that before Rio 92, Stockholm 72 started the whole world discussion about environmental matters, right? And I did not mention this before, but of course, besides the FTA between the EU and the Mercosur states, there are also side letters discussing, of course, on what we call the sustainable trade development, which has to do with this approach, how to preserve the ecosystem, how to protect nature, and how also to offer a better quality. So everything is related to sustainable energy in Brazil, to telecom, to defense, are of course very important areas for Sweden. But those are of course business areas, right? But we have to think of diversity. Diversity is very important for all the areas I meant before. Diversity means we have to have different gender, different nationalities, different religion, different beliefs, different races. This is, of course, very important for a Swedish company. In a country where half of the ministers are females and where foreigners become Swedes and become members of government, of parliament, that's very important to allow the people to get a chance. And so I always respond to this business question with the social model as well. Diversity, but also, of course, the social sustainability and the corporate social responsibility. Those are the three key co-answers to the first that you asked me.
Thank you very much. I must say this session was organized by Dr. Sigrid Guillemot and Jacqueline Gil. They very important to make this session possible. Jacqueline and Sigrid, would you like to ask any question or comments?
Yes, thank you so much, Professor José Marcio. Yes, I do have a question. First of all, it's great to see you talking to us, Renato, here at the University of Brasilia. I have had the chance to hear you many other times, and it's always really enlightening and great to see your insights. I do have a question, and it relates to your two final comments right now in terms of how important sustainability and the environment is for Sweden historically, and also for the European Union more and more, especially now with a strong leader coming up in Germany from the Green Party, a young woman, and this debate being refreshed within the European Union with many new and younger voices coming up into the decision-making institutional top places. The question is, we do understand that the investments, especially between Europe and Brazil and Europe, have been long-term, as you just mentioned. Even at the time of Brazil monarchy, Dom Pedro II went to Sweden to search for investments here. However, despite this long-term investment mindset, do you perceive currently in the business environment and in the investment flows already a concern that's changing in some ways the decision-making towards Brazil because of the communications around environment policy in Brazil at the moment? Do you see any dent already in the investment flow, or is it just said, not done yet? How do you see it happening?
Yes, I do see, Jacqueline, and thank you so much for a very important question. Glad to answer. It's no secret that Brazil's position has been very much criticized, right? And this has to do with the model I just spoke of before, which is a sustainable model where not only nature is preserved, but the social values, diversity, and respect to differences. And of course, we all know that in the investment world, as meant before, you focus on the long run. But of course, there is a lot of money in the private sector. There are many investment funds who could just press the button, remove millions or even billions of dollars in a day from Brazil or into Brazil, depending on the stability scenario, right? That's how stock exchange works. That's how big business works. And why should they produce in Brazil and not in Argentina, not in Peru, right? So I remember we had many discussions within the European countries, how to enable a better environment scenario in Brazil, so that not only European investors, but also the national Swedes or the national French, the national Germans could find a protected place. Of course, business is challenging per nature, right? And business is the remuneration of the risk you take. So you don't find business which is not risk taking. That's of course for sure. But there are still different levels of risks. Like, if you see nowadays, it's much cheaper for Europeans to invest in Brazil because of the valuation of the national currency, right? So when you acquire a company, it became at least 50% or 45% cheaper than 1.5 years before. We had 40% devaluation in the currency. So on the one hand, people say, well, now is the right time to go to Brazil and purchase companies or invest in real estate or buy the Brazilian export goods because they are cheaper. Well, this might be true, again, in the short run. But in the long run, that's not true. Because why on earth does a country so much devalue its currency? Because it's lacking stability, right? It can lack political stability, which is the case. It can lack economic stability, which is the case. It can lack sanitary stability, which is the case. And of course, no country on earth is perfect, again, but you have to have a certain balance among the institutions. And Brazil, I always say, is a young democracy because the constitution is now 33 years old, which is, I would say, a generation. Normally people are born, grow, study, finish university, marry and get kids, more at this age, 30 something, 32, 33, 34. So it's a generation. And a generation is a little time compared to the very long tradition European democracies have, right? If you think of the French Revolution, if you think of the glorious British Revolution, of course, even Germany experienced after its dictatorship at least now 8 decades of freedom of democracy. And that's, I think, a reason why it's so important for us to see that nothing happens in the short run. But again, there is, of course, a warning light. You probably read, as everyone here, that countries like Germany and even Norway, they took out resources from the Amazon program, right? Which now the government is looking for again because it's lacking the funds. So of course, I don't believe that in the long run this cooperation will disappear, but I believe there are signs that, again, no national government, I'm not speaking about Brazilian government, of all governments in general, they cannot only act and take measures thinking on themselves. They have to think on the global economy where production chains are liaised to each other and products are assembled with different components and delivered to different jurisdictions. And so that's why it's a global playing together nowadays. It's not just a single player career that doesn't exist in modern economy. So to answer your question, I would say yes, there are lights, but I do believe that this are provisory happenings which will be succeeded by better times. And also we are seeing that the governments are simulating the need of cooperating, because also not only in Brazil, right, but also United States, quite recently, the White House changed its administration. And you see that US is also recovering a substantial part of its leadership in the climate discussion worldwide. So in Brazil, we also see not only a federal leadership, we see also state leaderships. And I mean, I'm here headquartered in the city of São Paulo, state of São Paulo, whose economy is at least as big as Argentina's economy, right? If not bigger, actually. So population-wise, we have more Paulistas than Argentinians. So Brazil is also in the process of understanding what we call this power diplomacy, where not only the federal state is in contact with the world outside Brazil, but also the states, the municipalities, and that's why it's a totally different world nowadays.
Thank you. Very nice. Thank you.
We are open to questions. Anyone, you can post your question in the chat, or you can ask your question through your microphone. So
I see Professor Ziegler has raised her hand.
Yeah.
Please, go ahead, Professor.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for your excellent presentation to us. It brings a lot of insights. And well, I have a smaller question in terms of, I'm not looking into like the wider economic environment, but I have had the opportunity myself to go to Sweden once to study, to participate in a cultural difference group of study. And it was funny because I was already a doctor at that time, and together with other junior doctors, and we had a barbecue to see the sunset, which was not a sunset because the sun would not set. It was like 11 o'clock in the night and it was still some sunlight. And I remember at some point that I took a knife and I picked like a piece of sausage and I pointed to someone, you know, to offer, like, would you like to have a piece? And the Swedish people, they freaked out because I was like taking a knife and offering food to someone like with the knife. And they kind of said like, oh, this is an indigenous stereotype. Oh, this is wild, you know, this is very offensive because you are offering something like with a knife, which is something aggressive to someone. And I did not even think about it. So it was funny because even in an environment, let's say like an intellectual environment, it was very fast that people looked at me like in a stereotype way. So my question is, beside like the most common stereotypes that we know, like Brazilian woman and you know, carnival, and we are so happy and we don't care about the future and things like that, do you see any like institutional stereotypes or things that people think of Brazil in terms of doing disagreement or making investments? For example, our institutions are too slow, or things that we should kind of be aware of in terms of when we are dealing internationally, we should be more aware of those things so that we are not always enforcing the stereotypes and avoiding things to be better to us. But I mean, not the most superficial stereotypes, but the ones that probably belong to the negotiations, deeper negotiations, this investments. What is the kind of cultural problem that we can face when we are talking about like more important things? I mean, what is the view of Sweden or Europeans into Brazilian country in that sense? I'm not sure if my question was clear.
It's very clear. It is very clear, and I'm happy to answer it, Professor Ziegler.
Thank you.
The point you touched upon is of utmost interest because Brazilians are very known in Sweden for not being, I'm sorry to say I'm also Brazilian myself, not being so much organized. I mean, in Sweden, you prepare things ahead, you plan a lot, so you discuss, you get what we call the consensus decision. So you take in Sweden a long time before a decision is made. But when it's made, it's not challenged anymore. It remains in place and will be executed and enforced. Whereas in Brazil, the impression Swedes have, and I would say that they're not wrong, because I'm also Brazilian myself, and I confess I realize they're right. is that Brazilians, they're not very good in organizing things, but they are in opposite very good in improvising things. They don't think of the long run, they think of the short run. And if I tell you, well, you have to prepare something for tomorrow, you do it brilliantly, because you can, as a Brazilian, improvise quite quickly and, well, not necessarily get a fantastic result, but not necessarily a bad result. Brazilians are very creative people. Whereas Swedes, they are a bit more, step back oriented and say, look, I will not try if I'm not prepared. And we'll be planning and reviewing the plan and discussing and getting the consensus. So there are differences in the cultures, but I think this is positive, because this happens one to complete the other and make a good synergy out of it, right? I mean, I say Brazil is not only in terms of this temperament or behavior way of dealing with situations very different than Sweden. But of course, I think the weather plays a role, right? Because in Sweden, if you don't prepare for winter, you die on the street. In Brazil, I mean, in Sao Paulo, even though it's quite cold in winter, but it's maybe 12, 13 degrees, which is almost summertime in Sweden, right? So you could still survive on the streets in Sao Paulo, even though you did not prepare for the winter. Whereas in Sweden, you cannot. If you don't prepare, you just die. And of course, this also has to do with the fact that Brazilians, became Brazilians because migration waves we had into the country, right? So the real Brazilians are the indigenous people who were here before the Portuguese came. But everybody became Brazilian. The Portuguese became Brazilians, the Spanish became Brazilians, the Lebanese people, the Japanese people, the Swedes, the Germans, everybody became Brazilians. And that's, of course, a different approach to unify a culture. We see this when we merge companies, right? It takes years to get a common culture out of the former two companies. And I think somehow this is also true in regard to the Brazilian culture, because we mixed so many cultures together, people from Africa, people from Europe, people from Asia, people from the indigenous people from Brazil. So it's taking a long period. But I see, on the other hand, that nowadays, because of the communication tools, it's getting easier and faster to integrate people, right? Because of course, not the same if I could be myself in place at the University of Brasilia to hold this lecture. But it works. I mean, I'm sitting here in my office in São Paulo, we are talking to each other. It's not the same, of course, but it's better than nothing. So I think barriers are disappearing and being lifted very quickly. And this leads to a small world, right? Where people have a trend to come closer to each other in a faster time frame. And this, if you see, for instance, it took us so many years to create what we call a laptop. But nowadays, almost nobody wants to buy a laptop. They want to buy a smartphone or a tablet or iPad because it's lighter. You can carry everywhere. And desktops became something from the past, right? Because it's heavy, that you keep on your office. So I think technology is moving quite fast. And I still remember that European standards also were surprised that Sweden was so innovative in its culture, right? It's not by chance that most of the innovations we know in biology, think of Carl von Linné, the one who classified, animal natures. He was a Swede, the Celsius scientist, the Nobel, Alfred Nobel. So many Swedish innovative scientists contributed to this world we have today. So again, this has to do with conditions that the country has, but also with the public policies. In Sweden, education is a must. Research is a must. So every Swedish company will invest a lot before sharing profits among its shareholders, because the best return for the shareholders is not the money, but it's the innovation they can get to the civil society. And that's why in Sweden, it's very common that a CEO doesn't necessarily make more than 3 or 4 times the salary of the lowest employee in the company, because they all believe that social equality is a key for success. And to finalize my answer to your question, Professor Sigrid, there's also another very big difference between the two countries, because Swedes see Brazil as a very unequal country. That's like a stereotype they have, that in Brazil, a CEO can make 40 times the salary of the lowest employee in the company. And that is true sometimes, right? It's, I mean, a bit of truth that we hope will be, I mean, evolved in the future, but it depends on people who are going abroad and getting to know not only the Swedish culture, but other cultures, right? So that's why I always say, and I didn't say this before, but I think it's a good opportunity to mention, that we have also an alumni called Sweden Alumni in Brazil, which are the Brazilian students like me who went to study in Sweden and came back, and well, are glad to share those ideas and values. And I think this is, of course, not only a Swedish thing, but within all the European member states, that's of course a great advantage to share this kind of experiences, and also try to build up a better society. So these two, criteria in a nutshell are essential: equality or inequality, and I mean, this perspective of innovating and organizing things, and not only preparing or being just creative in the improvisation. Hope I answer your question.
Thank you so much. You gave us a lot of insights on that matter. Thank you. Thank you so much. And congratulations for your presentation.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you very much. We're still open to questions, but you can post in the chat, or just can open the microphone and place your question.
Sure. Also,
yes,
in Portuguese, it's not a problem. It's not a problem.
Oh.
I can also speak in Portuguese. If the students feel also better, I can also answer in Portuguese or take the questions in Portuguese, not a problem. Not in Swedish. I'm not taking Swedish. Interpreta svenska då, Maria. Bara português que se provar.
Great. Well, I have a question regarding Brazilian investment in Sweden or European Union. Do we still have something significant? Do you have some investment? Or because I teach international business here at the University of Brasilia, and Brazilian companies are big. Some of them are very well managed. They have very good products, are very good services, and for-profit education we're very big. The finance, we have very big banking corporations. We are also very prominent in the food business, but I see that very few companies, Brazilian companies, are investing in Europe. What you can say about that?
Well, that's also a very appropriate question, Professor José Marcio. Thank you for it, because you are totally correct. It seems like more a one-street way, right? I mean, we have more investments from the EU or from Sweden to Brazil, and less investments from Brazil, the outbounds to the European countries, or especially to Sweden. There are two reasons for this. I first answer on behalf of Sweden, and secondly, I answer on behalf of the EU. The answer on behalf of Sweden is easier because the domestic market is so small. So with 10 million people, I mean, if you come out of a market with 200 million people or 210 million people, it's less than, let's say, 5% of your domestic market. So for Brazilian company, investing for B2C is not worth, because it's very little market. Of course, this is not true when we go beyond Sweden. We go to the European Union with at least 2 times, even more than 2 times the Brazil's population. But then the answer on behalf of the EU becomes different than on behalf of Sweden. It's a question of competition, right? This has to do with the currency rates I spoke of before, because it became extremely expensive or too expensive for the Brazilian companies to invest. If you get almost 7 reais for an euro, it's extremely unpayable to invest in Sweden. Or, you know, Sweden doesn't have the euro, of course, we have the crowns, but let's say in European countries, it's much better to trade. So that's what I made a comment before. Now it's very cheap to buy in Brazil, right? Because the goods are bought in reais, so the currency was devaluated. In Europe, it's the other way around. It's very expensive for Brazilians to purchase European goods, to import European goods, and even more expensive to invest in Europe, because the investment will have to be done in euros, of course. And if you go to bigger markets like Germany or like France, they are smaller than Brazil, it's true, but they are much more competitive. So even the good companies in Brazil who deliver good services, they will find a lot of very tough competition in these jurisdictions. Of course, this does not apply for the export of goods like commodities, if you think of sugar or beef or whatever kind of agriculture products, because of course, in spite of some subsidies which some countries give, like France, is still very cheap to export the products. But to really have an investment, I can answer on behalf of Sweden, who I happen to know better, of course. I remember one investment was made in the country, and please don't quote, but this is something which the current governor of São Paulo did. Before João Dória was a mayor, he was running a decoration fair called Casa Cor. Some of you might know it, Casa Cor. And Casa Cor brought to Sweden a lot of investment in terms of architecture, internal design, but this was again a very limited investment, which did not last more than 2-3 years, because again, competition there is much tougher than here, and education level is higher, of course, and then it's very hard for Brazilian companies to not only invest but to compete in those countries, right? I could cite 1 or 2 other companies who invested in Sweden, but it's not a very substantial investment compared to the investment that Swedish companies did in Brazil. And the same applies for other countries. And this has, answering your question, with these 2 elements, currency and competition level, which is much higher in Europe. So that's, of course, a barrier for Brazilian investment abroad. Nevertheless, as I meant before, it is still a good opportunity for Brazilian products to be exported, especially if they are commodities, because they are still very cheap nowadays because of the devaluation. So it's an equation which must be balanced, and that will take some time to get this EU-Mercosur agreement well regulated. I did not mention this before, but when you go for dismantling the tariff barriers, it takes, from the Brazilian side, between 10 and 15 years. But from the European perspective, a bit less, 10, maybe 11, 12 years. It's easier to dismantle the barriers in Europe because Europe is already used to it within the European Union, right? You don't need, a lot of papers, red tapes. You can import, export much more easily. Whereas in Brazil or in Mercosur states, it's still very hard. There's a lot of red tape. Just to give a final insight, the economic agents, the operators in the bilateral trade, they are independent people who are certified by the customs office to release the goods when they're imported. In Brazil, we are still walking very slowly in this matter, whereas in Europe it's very, very, very widespread. So this is something which will take some time in Brazil, but I think this is why the Mercosur agreement is a huge advantage, like a lesson to be learned by both sides, by Brazilians and other Mercosur states and the Europeans and you on the other side. Hope I had answered your question accordingly.
Thank you very much. You have a question from João Gabriel. Please go ahead.
Licença, I'm good at listening, but not so much speaker, então eu vou perguntar em português mesmo. A Suíça, ela tem uma segurança de banco altamente qualificada. Eu gostaria de saber se está tendo uma conexão entre os bancos brasileiros com os bancos da Suíça, ainda mais agora na área da tecnologia, né? O Banco Central também vem incrementando muito essa área. E, juntamente a isso, se não há, entre as empresas brasileiras, suécias também, uma forte conexão financeira, né, entre ambos os países. E como que o norte da Europa, inclusive esse país específico, não existe neutralidade política, de certa forma, alta representatividade, gera fatores econômicos maiores e como isso vem sendo propagado para os demais países, sobretudo.
Muito obrigado, João Gabriel, pelas suas perguntas. Eu vou tentar respondê-las em blocos. Talvez começar um pouco mais pelo final, na parte política, depois eu volto à questão financeira dos bancos, enfim, até falar um pouco de criptomoedas também, né? Com relação à parte política, eu acho importante deixar claro aqui que a Suécia é um paraíso também, né? Até eu acho que eu comentei isso na exposição, mas queria dizer que a Suécia ficou sem governo durante praticamente quase mais de meio ano, porque o parlamento, enfim, acabou sendo dissolvido, foram convocadas novas eleições e nós tivemos também na Suécia problemas de extrema direita. Então a Suécia mesmo tem hoje como seu terceiro partido mais forte um partido radical de extrema direita. Evidentemente que a Suécia é uma democracia, então se as pessoas são eleitas, elas têm que participar do debate democrático, né? E eu digo isso para dizer que houve uma certa onda de extremismos, não só na Suécia, mas em toda a Europa, de um modo geral, e em todo o mundo, não só na Europa, nos Estados Unidos, na América do Sul, na Ásia, nós tivemos agora também a situação em Mianmar. Então, quer dizer, isso é um fenômeno que ocorre sazonalmente, de forma cíclica, em vários países, e não é um fenômeno apenas brasileiro ou apenas só sueco, né? Mas, apesar disso, a Suécia conseguiu eleger um governo de coalizão, que é um governo de centro-esquerda, né? É um governo minoritário, nenhum partido tem a maioria, mas visando justamente preservar o que você perguntou, os valores e a estabilidade, porque o partido de direita que se elegeu, embora ficou em terceiro lugar, não conseguiu formar uma maioria em coalizão para governar o país. Então, o centro-esquerda acabou conseguindo essa coalizão e está hoje, enfim, praticamente desde 2014, é o mesmo primeiro-ministro que nós temos, né? E que até, inclusive, é um líder sindical. Ele não estudou, não fez curso superior, mas o ministro Stefan Löfven tem, enfim, dirigido o governo sueco há praticamente já 7 anos, ininterruptos, tirando esse período que nós não tivemos governo. Eu digo isso para mostrar também que a Suécia tem seus desafios, né? A Suécia não é nenhum paraíso, eu já disse, mas gosto de repetir, porque as pessoas às vezes são muito idealizadoras. Não, mas a Suécia é tudo perfeito. Não, a Suécia não é tudo perfeito. A Suécia também teve uma série de desafios ao longo da sua história, mas uma coisa que eu sempre cito, que eu acho que foi muito importante para a Suécia, é que a Suécia tem a lei mais antiga de liberdade de imprensa no mundo, do século XVIII. Enfim, então isso permitiu uma transparência na sociedade, acesso à informação. No Brasil, o acesso às informações públicas tem talvez um pouco mais de uma década agora, de prática até menos que isso, né? Então é uma diferença muito grande. E eu faço disso a conexão com a primeira parte da sua pergunta na questão financeira dos bancos, a cooperação financeira, e até posso também comentar um pouco sobre as criptomoedas, porque a Suécia é um país que já tem planejado ter o seu, a gente chama de Kron, né? O Crypto Kron, brevemente para o Banco Central da Suécia, que é também o primeiro banco central independente do mundo. Então, quer dizer, a Suécia, além de ter tido no século XVIII a primeira lei de imprensa livre no mundo, liberdade de imprensa, também foi o primeiro país a ter um banco central independente do governo no mundo, o que também garantiu a estabilidade da moeda e até mesmo escolher não optar por ter o euro como moeda na Suécia. A Suécia, assim como poucos países na União Europeia, preferiu manter a sua moeda própria, né? Como uma forma de garantir estabilidade também política para o seu governo. E o que eu posso dizer para você com relação aos bancos, até um pouco da minha experiência pessoal, um pouco como também enfim, advisor de investidores aqui no Brasil, é que muitos bancos suecos que estavam aqui saíram do Brasil, né? O Banco Nordeste saiu do Brasil, o Handelsbanken saiu do Brasil, mas sair do Brasil não quer dizer largar o Brasil, eles saíram fisicamente. Porque hoje em dia, os próprios bancos brasileiros não fazem diferentemente, né? São todos digitais. Eu me lembro que a última vez que eu fui no banco foi antes da pandemia para pegar um cartão de crédito, porque eu não queria que viesse para minha residência, porque eu moro em casa, podia cair na mão errada. Eu vou no banco pegar o cartão de crédito. Mas quase ninguém hoje precisa ir no banco, porque o banco está na sua casa, está no seu computador, está na sua mão, está no seu app, né? E a Suécia, por ser um país muito digital, a Suécia também digitalizou muito os serviços financeiros, né? Então, por isso que eu falo que os bancos saíram do Brasil, não é que eles largaram os investimentos. Existem hoje muitos seguros à exportação da Suécia que são financiados por bancos suecos no Brasil, mas sem a presença física, né? Porque hoje é feito muito digitalmente isso. E também as próprias criptomoedas, né, são hoje muito baseadas em tecnologia. que é um dos principais diferenciais da inovação sueca na área de, enfim, não só financeira, mas em tudo aquilo que tem a ver com inovação. Se a gente pensar na Tetra Pak, por exemplo, a Tetra Pak foi a primeira companhia sueca que permitiu o leite ficar, enfim, durando semanas, enfim, com proteção, porque houve tecnologia para isso. Então, também, toda a parte de investimento na área financeira da Suécia é enorme. Eu talvez depois possa até, em particular com você, trocar mais informações, para não, enfim, agora talvez me aprofundar demais, mas é isso que a Suécia faz empréstimos online pelo celular há 10 anos já, coisa que no Brasil surgiu mais recentemente, né? Enfim, então, todo um movimento que existe digital na Suécia, até para poder combater, enfim, as dificuldades de transporte com o frio. É difícil sair de casa com 25 graus abaixo de zero também, e aproveitando a conexão de comunicações, porque, como eu falei, a Suécia hoje é um dos poucos países do mundo que tem condição de oferecer uma tecnologia 5G. Hoje, basicamente, nós temos 3 ou 4 países do mundo capazes de participar do leilão, e a Suécia é um deles, né? Então, quer dizer, porque essa parte financeira, digital, não seria possível sem a parte da comunicação, e o 5G tem um papel fundamental nisso. Espero ter respondido a sua pergunta, mas fico à disposição para depois nós podemos aprofundar bilateralmente, mas também aproveitar um pouquinho do tempo aqui que nós temos ainda para outras colocações ou perguntas de colegas também. Nós temos, acho que, mais 10 minutinhos ainda, né, professora?
Bom, está aberto ainda as perguntas, mas eu tenho uma pergunta que é fundamental para a gente fazer aqui, esse projeto especificamente, sobre as oportunidades de estudo e intercâmbio acadêmico na Suécia, pelo fato de ter tido uma experiência pessoal. Eu sei que não faz parte do seu trabalho como cônsul, mas o que o senhor poderia falar para a gente sobre essas oportunidades?
Olha, eu posso falar muita coisa, porque a Suécia tem incentivado muito a vinda de estudantes, pesquisadores, doutorandos, pós-doutorandos, ou até mesmo pesquisa industrial, como eu mencionei o caso da SAAB, né? A SAAB, que é uma das fundadoras desse Centro de Inovação Sueco-Brasileiro, oferece bolsas de estudo constantes a pesquisadores nas áreas de ciências mais exatas, evidentemente, mas também a outras bolsas na área de ciências biomédicas, na área de ciências humanas também. E assim, existe, como eu falei, aquele Sweden Alumni, que é uma associação hoje dos próprios ex-estudantes na Suécia. Eu participo dela como um ex-estudante também, mas nós temos, enfim, as feiras estudantis, que geralmente acontecem não só no mês de outubro, que é uma sessão onde todas elas estão no mesmo dia. Hoje é virtual, evidentemente, né? Mas acontecem feiras estudantis suecas virtuais, agora em quantidade até maior, por causa da pandemia. E eu posso depois, professor Zé Marcos, colocar a UNB, o seu departamento, a Jaqueline, a professora Zigrid em contato com essas pessoas. Nós temos na embaixada também, aí pertinho de vocês em Brasília mesmo, uma sessão voltada à questão da educação, ao intercâmbio, não só na área de pesquisa, mas também mesmo educacional, de undergraduates, alunos mais jovens que querem, enfim, esse desafio. E digo também, eu sempre gosto de dizer isso, que não é fundamental estudar na Suécia em sueco. Você pode estudar na Suécia em inglês. Então, aliás, a maioria dos estudantes estrangeiros na Suécia não estuda em sueco, estuda em inglês, porque a Suécia, eu falo isso com um certo orgulho também, é o país na Europa que melhor fala inglês depois do Reino Unido, né? Não é à toa que o ABBA não ficou famoso cantando em sueco, o ABBA ficou famoso cantando em inglês, né? E a quantidade...
Eu estudei, só um comentário, eu estudei na Inglaterra, fiz doutorado lá, e muitos ingleses dizem que o inglês da Suécia é melhor que o inglês do Reino Unido.
Obrigado. Isso também achou um pouco de bondade dos professores que o receberam lá, professor José Márcio. Assim, de fato, a Suécia sabe que ela tem uma língua muito rara, é uma língua falada por 10 milhões de pessoas, que é metade da cidade de São Paulo. Então, com essa língua, ela não vai muito longe. Então, até para ela poder se internacionalizar, ela teria que partir para a língua inglesa, né? E isso nós vemos, claro, não só na Fundação Alfred Nobel, em todas as fundações de pesquisa, e boa parte dos programas suecos de pós-graduação são em inglês mesmo para os suecos, porque a publicação de uma tese de doutorado, se for feita em sueco, vai ser lida por muito poucas pessoas. Então, quer dizer, praticamente 90% dos trabalhos de pós-graduação na Suécia são escritos em inglês, para poder permitir esse intercâmbio, né, na esfera de educação. E, claro, talvez algumas áreas mais restritas, e eu digo aqui o caso da minha área de origem, que é o direito, as pesquisas são mais feitas em sueco, porque, claro, é direito sueco. Mas eu mesmo, quando estudei na Suécia, não estudei direito. Eu comentei que, quando eu fui fazer minha pós na Europa, eu fiz na Alemanha, na área jurídica, mas eu não cheguei a falar isso. Mas na Suécia eu não estudei direito. Eu estudei a parte de business, eu sou alumnus, né, da Stockholm School of Economics, que também, além de economics, também é business, né? Tem a parte privada e pública, eu fiz a parte privada, ligada mais aos negócios internacionais, que é onde eu me especializei. Mas eu, por acaso, eu estudei em sueco, porque era um objetivo que eu tinha, eu já falava o idioma, eu tinha aprendido o sueco aqui na Câmara de Comércio. Isso eu não falei, mas já que o professor tocou nesse assunto, é interessante dizer que a própria Câmara sueca oferece o curso de sueco online. Então, você não precisa nem sair de Brasília, basta se logar aqui, tem os horários, os cursos, você pode... Eu comecei com um beginner e fui até proficiente, depois pus estudar na Suécia. Enfim, então, quer dizer, é uma língua que ela não é tão comum, mas não é impossível. Eu mesmo, assim, não venho de família sueca, não tenho nenhuma ligação familiar com a Suécia, mas estudei como brasileiro e fui depois fazer meu curso em sueco por opção própria, mas poderia ter feito o curso em inglês também, né? E, assim, eu digo isso para mostrar que a Suécia é um país aberto ao inglês e também dizer que muitos estudantes brasileiros que por acaso tiverem até, por acaso, um passaporte europeu, às vezes alguém tem um passaporte italiano, que é muito comum no Brasil, um passaporte de outro país, espanhol, pode dar até de graça na Europa, porque na Suécia, porque com o passaporte europeu você não paga o FII para estudar na Suécia. Como brasileiro, aí seria fora da comunidade europeia, você tem que pagar um tuition fee, mas o tuition fee da Suécia, eu não tenho aqui os dados de cabeça, que até variam de universidade para universidade, mas são muito mais baratos. Eu diria que no máximo 1/3 dos FIIs que se paga na Inglaterra ou na França, enfim, para universidades que cobrem os alunos estrangeiros, e por isso ela atrai tantos estrangeiros também do Brasil, porque é um curso mais barato que os outros países. A Suécia tem uma excelente infraestrutura, apesar do frio, que é muito grande. Claro que existe a calefação, existe aquecimento dos meios de transporte, e também existem roupas muito bem feitas e baratas. Aqui, eu lembro que quando eu fui para a Suécia estudar, apesar da minha experiência na Alemanha, eu tenho que ser sincero e contar aqui só um comentário rápido, que eu menosprezei a temperatura. Eu estava em Estocolmo, onde eu estudei, e queria ir para Uppsala, ou Uppsala, que a gente fala na Suécia. Uppsala é a universidade mais antiga da Suécia, né? É uns 100 quilômetros de Estocolmo. Eu falei, eu vou de manhã, e volto no final da tarde. É um trem de 50 minutos, 55. Então, eu não vou levar o meu casacão, o meu overcoat. Eu vou só com uma malha, um blazer. Professor, quando foi 4:30 da tarde que eu precisava voltar para Estocolmo, eu falei, eu não vou conseguir chegar na estação de trem, que era a menos de 6 quarteirões da universidade, em Uppsala. Que era tanto frio, que eu tive que entrar numa loja para me esquentar por meia hora para poder sair na rua, depois andar 5 minutos. Era um frio muito grande na Suécia, né? E olha que eu tinha morado na Alemanha, então estava acostumado com temperaturas frias. Na Suécia é muito frio. Mas é claro que depois eu aprendi que eu tinha que comprar as roupas na Suécia e não comprá-las no Brasil, né? Também é uma dica que eu dou brincando no final da palestra, que a Suécia também tem roupas quentes, baratas e de excelente qualidade. Então eu tenho roupas que até hoje estão no meu armário, quando eu vou para a Suécia, só uso aquelas roupas que eu sei que eu não vou passar frio também. Mas enfim, eu vou colocar depois a Jaqueline, a professora Zigrid, o senhor também, professor José Márcio, em contato com a embaixada, com esse grupo do Sweden Alumni, que eu acho que é muito bacana para os estudantes não só ouvirem a minha palestra, mas também depois poderem ter a sequência desse contato, enfim, quem se convenceu que vale a pena, enfim, se aproximar um pouquinho da cultura sueca, desse país pequeno, mas que é tão interessante, tem tantas ligações com o Brasil, na parte cultural, na parte da família real, na parte do futebol, na parte das pesquisas, e lembrar sempre que a Universidade de Brasília é tão prestigiada, né? É uma pena que eu não possa ir pessoalmente, mas eu me lembro sempre do prestígio da sua instituição e dizer também que eu acho que se nós formos ter algum prêmio Nobel no Brasil, a possibilidade de sair algum da Universidade de Brasília é muito grande, porque as melhores cabeças do Brasil saem da sua escola. Então, eu não estou no comitê, mas sei que nós tivemos, é só um detalhe que eu queria finalizar, nós tivemos há 2 semanas, quase 3 agora, os Diálogos Nobel. e vários estudantes brasileiros participaram. Então, eu posso depois mandar o link também. Eu até, na ocasião, acabei esquecendo de falar isso com a Jaqueline, com o senhor também, mas assim, esses diálogos vão acontecer no Brasil o ano que vem, presencialmente também, e quem sabe até a UNB pode ser envolvida, porque, enfim, a Fundação Alfred Nobel está sempre buscando parceiros para poder divulgar melhor as pesquisas, projetos que eles têm. Não é só o Prêmio Nobel que é o único projeto. Aliás, é uma coisa importante de dizer. Muita gente acha, mas o Prêmio Nobel é uma coisa impossível. Não é. O Brasil nunca teve um Prêmio Nobel, mas, enfim, já teve um co-Prêmio Nobel, que é uma outra história, que foi para uma instituição. Mas, assim, eu acho que instituições como a sua, que desenvolve essa pesquisa, esse contato não só com consulados, mas também com câmaras de comércio. E, nesse sentido, eu agradeço muito o trabalho da Jaqueline, que eu conheci através do Enrich aqui em São Paulo, né, quando ela esteve aqui conosco, inclusive. É muito importante para poder encurtar essas distâncias, né? Então, acho que a questão aí das fundações suecas, tem várias fundações que fomentam a pesquisa, é fundamental para os seus alunos terem contato. E, às vezes, os colegas docentes também querem fazer um pós-doc ou pesquisa, né? A professora Zigrid comentou e eu fiquei surpreso, sei que ela também teve lá um período na Suécia estudando também. Então, acho que ela vai confirmar que o frio existe lá. Ou ela foi no verão, pode ser que ela foi no verão. Pode ser que ela foi no verão também, não sei, né?
Fui na primavera e estava
isso,
frio. Super frio.
Eu já fiz trabalho de campo na Suécia, estudei mercado de café e visitei cafeterias em Estocolmo, quer dizer, um trabalho muito bom. O senhor teria tempo para uma última pergunta?
Claro, professor. Pois não.
Uma última pergunta, pessoal. Cássia? Cássia?
O microfone, Cássia.
Oi, agora foi. Então, eu só queria contribuir. A minha pergunta era do professor José Márcio. Eu queria mesmo saber mais sobre essa parte acadêmica, né? Como são as oportunidades e tal, porque a gente está muito acostumado a procurar essas oportunidades em países mais comuns, como os Estados Unidos. Eu, pessoalmente, tive a oportunidade de estudar nos Estados Unidos, também morei na Austrália. Eu voltei de lá esse ano. E é muito bom para a gente ter essa perspectiva de outros países, né? Por exemplo, a Suécia, que é assim, é um campo muito grande e muito influente, assim, de oportunidades. Então, é bem interessante. Eu queria agradecer, eu acho que em nome dos alunos, pela palestra. Foi muito, muito interessante, muito relevante. Para a gente, eu acho que tem muitos alunos de administração aqui. Então, é muito interessante saber sobre esses acordos comerciais, sobre essas trocas, né, comerciais entre os países, entre os continentes. Então, foi muito relevante, só queria agradecer mesmo. E essa questão do frio, quando eu estava eu morei em San Diego, em Nova York. E daí eu comprei um sapato em Nova York. Lá chega a ser frio, é muito frio, mas não é tão frio quanto na Europa, né? De lá eu fui visitar uns amigos na Suíça, que eu tenho muitos amigos na Suíça. Eu cheguei lá, a gente estava andando num negócio de neve, assim, meu sapato congelou. Gente do céu, meu Deus, fiquei desesperada. E lá é muito frio. Eu lembro que eu passei muito frio em Amsterdã também, que estava ventando, não estava nevando, mas por ser no nível do mar, estava ventando muito, muito. Eu lembro que quebrei 3 sombrinhas, que eu estava tentando andar na chuva, assim, aí passou o vento e quebrou tudo. Então, eu nem imagino como deve ser na Suécia, deve ser mais pesado ainda.
Cássia, eu que agradeço a gentileza do seu comentário, a pergunta também sua e do João Gabriel em nome do Corpo Discente da UNB, mas queria também aqui em nome do Consulado Geral da Suécia em São Paulo, do Team Sweden, também aí em Brasília pela embaixadora, Johanna Brisman Skog, agradecer o convite do professor José Márcio, da professora Zigrid, através da Jaqueline Gil, que, enfim, já é uma amiga aqui de longa data do projeto Enrich, que ela fez não só em Brasília, em São Paulo, no Brasil inteiro, e dizer que tanto eu como a nossa equipe aqui, o Peter Johansson, que é o vice-cônsul, o Alexandre, nós estamos aqui à disposição. O nosso consulado é um consulado pequeno também, eu só queria dizer isso, vocês às vezes pensam, puxa, o consulado sueco deve ser... Não, o consulado sueco é um espaço de praticamente 50 metros quadrados com 3 pessoas que trabalham, mas que é muito eficiente. Então, quer dizer, a gente é um país pequeno, não dá para ter 30 pessoas trabalhando, 300 seguranças na porta, então a Jaqueline conhece o prédio aqui, é um prédio bem low profile, não tem arame farpado, não tem ninguém com fuzil na porta, é low profile. Então, quem tem vir aqui a São Paulo, professor José Márcio, professora Zigrid, a Jaqueline, quando estiver aqui, é bem-vindo, tem que tomar um café. Agora não vou convidar porque não seria apropriado, né? Teria que ser um café aqui eu brinco virtual, mas quando a pandemia permitir, o consulado fica com muita honra em recebê-los aqui. Agradeço o convite e parabéns pela iniciativa, que acho que é muito importante aos alunos terem essa possibilidade de conversar com pessoas que estão fora da área acadêmica. Eu mesmo não sou um acadêmico, embora estudei fora, mas eu muito cedo me desliguei dessa atividade que eu acho maravilhosa e continuei nela através da minha esposa, que é professora universitária também. Então, eu sou suspeito para dizer, mas valorizo muito o investimento de longo prazo que vocês fazem em pesquisa, dedicação, atividade discente, que é muito importante para a construção de um Brasil melhor. E contem comigo, contem com a Suécia. Muito obrigado. Em sueco a gente fala tack så mycket e até bra. Obrigado, gente.
Muito obrigado.
Muito obrigada.
Uma palestra incrível, fantástica. Obrigado pela oportunidade, uma grande chance para os nossos alunos e professores. Então, também eu agradeço em nome da Universidade de Brasília para dizer que as portas aqui da Universidade estão abertas. Espero que a gente possa organizar um evento presencial no momento que isso for possível. Muito obrigado.
Obrigado, professor Jaqueline, professor e alunos. Em sueco fala hej då, bye bye. Hej då, bye bye.
Skål.
Hej då, Renato. Muito obrigada mesmo. Muito obrigada.
Obrigado, Jaqueline. Abraço a todos aí.
Tchau, Renato.
Tchau,
Um grande
gente.
prazer.
Obrigada, Renato.
Obrigada.
Tchau, tchau.
Tchau a todos.
Tchau, tchau.